So they look the same, they feel the same, they possibly taste the same. I don't know, I haven't done the old tongue test yet. And they launched mere weeks apart. So what is the ruddy difference between the OnePlus 15 and OPPO's Find X9 Pro? Well, first up, the OnePlus 15 sports a price tag that's a couple of £100 cheaper than the OPPO. Unless that is you opt for the upgraded model with more RAM and storage to bring it in line with the OPPO, but more on that in a bit. And anyway, I've used both the OnePlus 15 and the OPPO Find X9 Pro as my full-time phone for over a week apiece. So here's my perspective on which might be best for you. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe, ding the old notifications bell. Cheers! So yeah, I think it's fair to say that the OnePlus 15 and the OPPO Find X9 Pro sports a similar design, to the point where I have confused one for the other more than a few times. In fact, quick game, which one do you think is which? Any ideas? There's actually the OnePlus 15 here on the right, the OPPO on the left. They're both 6.78-inch smartphones, so a proper handful, although thankfully at least the bezels surrounding those displays pretty skinny, so no added girth. And both of them unfortunately follow the iPhone school of design, so they're proper bricks, no nice pleasing hand-friendly curves. And both these blowers sport a metal frame. One of the key differentiators is the fact you've got this camera button here on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, which is missing in action on the OnePlus. But on the opposite edge, they do both sport a shortcut key. And then around the back end, you've got a pretty similar camera bump, square-ish and wedged away in the corner there. But as you can see here on the OnePlus, the flash is actually integrated in that camera bump, whereas here in the OPPO you've got that Hasselblad branding, so the flash is shifted over to the side. And the Find X9 Pro's camera bump pokes up a wee bit further than the OnePlus's, but not by much. Now the OnePlus 15 comes in a small variety of different finishes, including this here ultraviolet model. It kind of reminds me of those old Parma Violet sweets you used to get back in the day, which frankly were pretty grim, so it's not a happy memory. You can also grab it in a plain matte black finish, otherwise the Sandstorm version is my favourite. That sports a fiberglass back, which is apparently tougher than titanium. Got a nice porcelain style texture, that one, eminently strokeable, whereas when it comes to the OPPO Find X9 Pro, not quite as exciting. It basically comes in white or charcoal, and that's it. But again, with a matte finish that is pleasingly smudge resistant. And they're both IP68 and IP69 dust and water resistant. In fact, the OnePlus 15 is even IP69K rated, which means it can tolerate even spurtier hot jets of water than the OPPO apparently, if that's gonna be a thing for you. So proper hefty slabs, the pair of them, but otherwise can't really complain about the design. Now both OnePlus and the OPPO Find X9 Pro sport an excellent ultrasonic in-display fingerprint sensor. Absolutely one of the best I've ever tested, just never seems to fail on me no matter how moist or oily my hands are. And last week I had a journey that was almost 24 hours of trains, planes, buses, etc. By which point my digits were drier than the Sahara, and yet still absolutely bugger all issues with the identification. Now you do also have face unlock with both the OnePlus 15 and the OPPO Find X9 Pro, which again, nice and nippy, doesn't seem to be any problems there. But I don't recall ever actually having to use this while I was testing these phones out, other than to just check that it bloody works, because the fingerprint sensor is so good. Now the OnePlus 15 comes with a choice of 256 or 512 gigs of UFS 4.1 storage, while the OPPO Find X9 Pro only comes in that half a terabyte configuration. Now if you find that you're constantly shooting with your smartphone camera, or you're addicted to whopping great wangers like bloody Wuthering Waves, which take up like 30 gigs of space by themselves, you might be more swayed by that 512 gig model. But on the OPPO it's a moot point, because you have to go with the half a terabyte. As for the software, well, you might notice some slight similarities between the two, despite the fact that you got Color OS here on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, and it's a bit of Oxygen OS here on the OnePlus 15. And they're essentially the same launcher. You've got the same split notifications control center setup, the same apps tray setup. If you dive on into the settings, you've got the exact same layout here. Slightly different icons, as you can see there. You've got the exact same customization options, including the Flux theme and shenanigans. And some pretty decent features packed into both as well, including an absolutely rammed gaming mode. Some pretty decent features in there, and motion cues as well, which can help to prevent motion sickness if you're traveling by car or bus or whatever. And of course they both come with that nifty little shortcut key over on that left edge, which I mentioned earlier, called the Snap key here on the Find X9 Pro, and the Plus key here on the OnePlus 15, one of the few differences. Sadly not as fully customizable as some alternatives from the likes of Apple, for instance. You've got a few different features you can toggle with this thing. And by default, they are tied to the Mindspace feature, which is one of the many bits of AI shindiggery slapped on both these blowers. And this is pretty good if, like myself, your memory is utter cack, mine mostly because I like the booze. You can use it to save a screenshot of anything you're interested in. It will then pull all of the information out of that screenshot. You can automatically add any important dates, etc. to your calendar. It's again pulled straight out of that screenshot. And thanks to a recent update on the Find X9 Pro, you can now search for information in Mindspace using Gemini, which is really helpful. Generate an itinerary for my trip to Mexico lasting 3 days using content at Mindspace. Then there we have a big old itinerary of all the stuff you can do using the content that I saved to Mindspace. And of course there's plenty of other AI shindiggery stuffed away in this pair of smartphones. But anyway, I've done a full ColorOS and OxygenOS 16 tips and tricks guide, which dives a bit deeper into some of the best features on this lovely pair. So go check those out for all you need to know. And you don't really need to watch both of them because it is pretty much a copy and paste affair. And hey, both the OPPO Find X9 Pro and the OnePlus 15 sport a 6.78-inch OLED display with a 1.5K resolution, so those visuals pretty crispy despite the spacious size of these displays. If you run through the old display settings, they're basically identical. You've got the exact same screen color modes, same eye care options. You've got PWM dimming on both as well if you are sensitive to OLED flicker. Image sharpener, video, color boost, yada yada. Got HDR10 and Dolby Vision streaming support on the pair of them as well, and both supremely bright, so I had absolutely no issue seeing what was going on, even when I was out in Mexico on a super bright, sunshiny day. And both of those screens can scale all the way down to practically 0 nits as well, so nice and comfortable viewing if you're just doom scrolling at 3 AM or whatever. However, one difference between this pair of smartphone screens is the refresh rate. It's a pretty standard 120Hz on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, whereas the OnePlus 15 upgrades that to 165Hz, which is good news for any gamers, especially as the likes of Call of Duty Mobile run at a native 165 frames per second on this thing. Personally, I've got to say, my knackered old peepers can't tell the difference between 120Hz and 165Hz, but if you're younger and sprightlier, you might actually appreciate that change. And also, I hate you. And a pretty banging pair of stereo speakers on both of them as well. Nice and beefy, certainly as far as smartphone blasters go anyway. And impressive clarity as well when you are enjoying a bit of Netflix or YouTube or whatever else on the go. And zero issues streaming to Bluetooth headphones, speakers, etc. either. Just works a charm, and the haptics nice and strong. Now, one of the big differences between this pair is the brains of the operation. It's Mediatek's Dimensity 9500 on the OPPO Find X9 Pro versus Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 here on the OnePlus 15. In both cases backed by 16 gigs of RAM if you opt for the upgraded model of the OnePlus 15. And of course, the everyday running as smooth as you like, apps load up instantly, multitasking not a problem. And if you are a gamer, well, great news, I had a fantastic experience blasting through the most intensive memory guzzling titles like Wuthering Waves on this pair. Of course, the OnePlus 15 does go a step further. You've got that 165Hz refresh rate, and it also massively upgrades the touch response rate from 240Hz to 3200Hz. Again, it's one of those areas where competitive gamers, anyone who's deep into their esports, might notice the difference between these two. Personally, I found they were both perfectly excellent for a bit of online Call of Duty action, as well as meandering my way through massive open world extravaganzas like Wuthering Waves. I found that frame rate stays nice and stable at its peak, even if you're gaming for well over an hour, helped by the fact that both of these handsets have their own dedicated cooling system packed inside. You've got a big old vapor chamber in both, and OnePlus has also gone the extra step, slathering the insides of the display with an aerogel cooler to help prevent that screen from heating up. But all the same, the Find X9 Pro stays just as cool under pressure, no issues there. And you do have that dedicated gaming mode, which is identical on both, packing all kinds of features including battery bypass charging. You've even got the option of keeping your games running in the background so you don't have to piddle around with title screens and all that load and bollocks the next time that you want to go play them. All I can say is if you can't even hang on a few seconds for your games to load, it's a good job you weren't born 3 decades earlier and the good old ZX Spectrum to contend with. 5 minutes of the most horrific screeching known to man every time you wanted to play bloody Jet Set Willy. Sorry, old man grumble over. And good news if you do yank your smartphone out quite a lot throughout the course of the day, because you've got massive whopping great batteries stuffed inside of both of these. 7,300 mAh on the OnePlus 15 versus 7,500 mAh on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, so the OPPO's just ever so slightly bigger. As far as the battery health goes, OnePlus reckons you should still have at least 80% battery health after 4 full years of regular use, whereas OPPO goes one step further, reckoning you'll have 80% battery health after 5 full years of regular use. So, pretty great if you want to stick with your smartphone until 2030, by which point, who knows, we'll probably be living in underground bunkers being simultaneously eaten and f***ed to death by mutant badgers. And there's not really anything between this pair. The battery life is absolutely superb. You'll get a screen on time well into double digits from a full charge of these things. So, even the most intensive users should be satisfied. And if you don't go crazy, you can easily get a full weekend of playtime out of a single charge. And to keep any benchmark fans from having a go at me in the comments, not that it'll probably help, I did do a battery drain test. Downloaded the same video on both phones, set them up the same, and let that video run on repeat. And let me tell you, these things literally last longer than my hangovers ever since I hit 40. I managed to get the whole way through Thunderbolts on them, admittedly a rather modest Marvel film, clocking in at just over 2 hours. And at the end of that first run, both phones still registered 100% on the battery meter. I was slightly worried at that point that this battery drain test might take several weeks to complete, but thankfully they did start to deplete during the second run through, and what you end up with is approximately 34 hours of video playback from a full charge with the OnePlus, and slightly more, around sort of 35-ish with the OPPO, which frankly is miles better than any other smartphone that I've tested. The OnePlus 15 does have a slight advantage when it comes to recharging, though, as it's got 120 watt wide charging support versus the 80 watts charging, slightly more sedate, on the OPPO Find X9 Pro. So the OnePlus charges up to full from empty in about sort of 40 minutes, whereas it takes just over an hour with the OPPO. And you do have a bit of 50 watt AirVook wireless charging support with both as well. And now, my dears, let's finish this quick squint at the OPPO Find X9 Pro and the OnePlus 15 by checking out the old camera tech. And as previously mentioned, the OPPO does sport that dedicated camera button slapped to the right edge, which you don't get with the OnePlus. This can be used to quick load the camera even when the phone is hibernating. And you can use this to zoom in on your subject, etc. But honestly, I just find it too awkwardly positioned. I just much prefer using the touchscreen controls, the old school style. The camera button aside, there's plenty of other differences when it comes to the camera hardware, including the sensors. So for instance, here on the OPPO, the main camera sensor is a Sony LYT828 sensor, which apparently OPPO helped to co-develop. It's a 1/1.28 inch sensor, so nice and large. Whereas here on the OnePlus, it is another 50 megapixel sensor, but it's a more basic Sony IMX906 effort, which is 1/1.56, so not quite as large, not quite as good at sucking up light. And it's also different image processing, because you've still got that Hasselblad processing on the OPPO Find X9 Pro versus OnePlus's own Detail Max engine. And I found that in general daylight scenes, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two. You usually get a pretty similar shot, reasonably realistic. Natural looking colours, occasional bits of oversaturation, but not too regular. Certainly more natural looking contrast than you would get with the likes of an iPhone. However, in softer light you will really notice a difference. The OnePlus 15 struggles to capture a natural looking photograph despite that Detail Max engine's best efforts, pumping out murkier tones and a real lack of depth at times. Those Find X9 Pro pics look a lot less flat and more vibrant. However, that said, on a couple of occasions the OPPO did struggle to focus as sharply as the OnePlus 15 when the lighting was CAC and the subject was really close up. You've also got a very different telephoto shooter, so the Find X9 Pro uses a 200 meg 1/1.56 inch sensor, the same size as the main sensor on the OnePlus 15, whereas the OnePlus uses a basic 50 meg telephoto shooter using a dinky 1/2.75 inch Samsung GN5 sensor. And again, in quite good lighting, the two are closely matched until you zoom in a serious amount, and then the Find X9 Pro usually wins by capturing more detail with that 200 meg shooter, although of course both lean quite heavily on the old AI processing. In HDR scenarios and in low light, the Find X9 Pro is again the obvious victor, with its larger sensor, capturing beautiful contrast and keeping those colours natural. And also you can boost the zoom potential of the OPPO Find X9 Pro by buying the additional OPPO Hasselblad teleconverter kit. And I've seen some impressive results from this thing for sure. For instance, shooting a stage show from quite a distance, you can get some nice crispy video, but honestly it is a bit of a ball ache to attach and detach every time you want to use it. You can only use the telephoto shooter when it is attached, and it certainly ain't cheap. When it comes to the ultra-wide shooters, not much difference between this pair. Got a 50 meg GN5 shooter here on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, and that is replaced with OmniVision's OV50D sensor here on the OnePlus. And despite some small technical differences and the different processing, this pair do pump out similar-ish results. As for the selfie cam setup, well, it's a 32 megapixel selfie shooter here on the OnePlus 15 versus a 50 meg sensor here on the OPPO Find X9 Pro, and both again can capture up to 4K resolution footage at 60 frames per second, so great news for your bit of vlogging shenanigans. Now when it comes to the video chops, well, somewhat interestingly, you can capture up to 8K resolution footage here on the OnePlus 15, whereas it does max out at 4K resolution here on the OPPO. But pretty much all of my test footage was shot at 4K resolution. You can capture that at 120 frames per second with Dolby Vision HDR switched on the main sensor on the OnePlus 15. You can also capture that quality with the telephoto on the OPPO Find X9 Pro. If you drop that frame rate to 60 frames per second, you can then bring the telephoto into action on the OnePlus, where you can actually use all three cameras on the OPPO Find X9 Pro. Anyway, I was perfectly happy with the video capture results on both of them. Again, the OPPO of course performs better in low light scenarios than the OnePlus, courtesy of the larger sensors. If you want to really see them in action, I used the OPPO Find X9 Pro to shoot my Bermondsey Beer Mile video over on my Spurt Hole channel, and the OnePlus 15 I mostly used to shoot my Mexican vlog, which should be live right now again on the Spurt Hole. But anyway, I've gone in depth into the camera tech in my full reviews of the OPPO Find X9 Pro and the OnePlus 15, so go check those out for all you need to know. Personally, I'm much more impressed by the OPPO Find X9 Pro when it comes to the optics, especially in those softer, more ambient environments. The evening shots and everything just looks so much better. And that for me is why I would choose the OPPO Find X9 Pro over the OnePlus 15. It's the main differentiating factor, apart from obviously the OnePlus 15 leaning more towards the gaming side of things with that 165Hz refresh rate, the faster touch response rate. So if you're well into your esports, you're a proper competitive online gamer, etc., you might prefer the OnePlus 15 and take the hit on that camera tech. And personally, I'm a knackered old git with arthritis, so I'm better suited to a quick blast on Wordle than a bit of PUBG these days. But besides that, very similar tech. You got very similar design, almost identical software experience, gorgeous display on both, cracking pair of stereo speakers, buckets of storage, especially if you upgrade the OnePlus 15, so it's got that 0.5 TB, the same as the OPPO. So solid smartphones, but the OPPO Find X9 Pro for me is the ultimate flagship here. It's just a solid all-rounder. Not flawless by any means, but the flaws that are there, they just feel like minor gripes really. Anyway, that's what I reckon. Which one are you more tempted by, the OnePlus 15 or the OPPO Find X9 Pro? It'd be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, which is your personal victor. Please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everybody, love you!